Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Meiser Sheni, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. We are already up to Daf Dalit, and we left off on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, by the brackets, by the 2 dots. Meiser Behema Ein Moichen Oisei Tamim Chai V'chulei. So first of all, even though the topic of the Mishnah is about Meiser Sheni, the Mishnah, beginning with the rules and the restrictions of things that may not be done with Meiser Sheni, made a correlation. Or you can say the Mishnah went off in a tangent, and the Mishnah also brought in Meiser Behema and Bachar. And really what's going to happen right now is that we will have almost 2 daf, straight out of Masechtas Kachim. For the people that are learning now, Daf HaYomi, we are in the month of Nisan, Tafshin Peivav, we're middle of Menachos. This is going to be mamish, like the Daf HaYomi Bavli. It's 2 daf of Kachim, even though it's going to be a bissel broadened as well. But first of all, we're going to focus on the first tangent, which is, like I mentioned, that Meiser Behema may not be sold Tamim Chai. Now, quickly, Aviv, Meiser Behema means that all of the domesticated animals, which only include 3 categories, Bakar V'Tzoin, cattle, sheep, and goats, that are born into my herd in any current year. You have to know how to calculate the year. That's one of the 4 Rosh Hashanahs that we have in the Sechtas Rosh Hashanah. Actually, they did what I'm going to mention 3 times every year, if I'm not mistaken, was divided into 3 subcategories. And every now and then, I think I made a mistake with that, but be that as it may, you take the animals of that year, you put them in a pen, and you have them exit the pen, you count them, and every 10th animal is consecrated, and let's call this into a subcategory of shlamim. In other words, a korban shlamim is in the category of kachim kalam. Shlamim is an animal that not only will there be portions given to the kohanim, and who knows what those portions are, the chazei and the shoik, which is fascinating, because really, from all animals, even from chulin animals, there is what we call the matanas that have to be given to the kohen. The zroya, the luchayayim, and the keva is a gift that has to be given really from any animal, even chulin, that belongs solely to a Jew. Not only that, according to almost all of the opinions, this is a biblical obligation whether you are in the Holy Land, even if you are outside the Holy Land. Happens to be that nowadays, the vast majority of Fruma Yidden don't give it from Chutz La'aretz. But that's chulin. From karbanos, from shlamim, what does the kohen get? No, it's by a kachim, by the chatos. All of the edible meat goes to the kohanim. Kachim may only be eaten by male kohanim. Kachim kalim, there is a portion that goes to the kohen or to the kohanim, the chazei and the shoik, and then the rest of the edible meat is given to the owners, and they have to eat it in Yerushalmi. Generally, shlamim has the longest eating period, which is 2 days and 1 night. Not only, and in other words, it's called kachim kalim. Included in kachim in shlamim and kachim kalim, including in the shlamim, you have habachar v'hamaiser v'hapesach hashgacha pratis, and they are kachim kalim, meaning they are eaten by the owners, but they're a little bit different than the regular shlamim, as many of us say every day, or should say every day, in a zeo mokayman. Meiser behemer is one such category. So when you designate the 10th, when you declare that this 10th is a holy animal, like any other holy animal that really has to be offered on the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to sell it, which is indeed what the Mishnah says, that Meiser Behema, Ein Moichrin Oisoi, Tamim Chai. There's a big problem with that. What's the problem, Aviv? What does that imply? That you only may not sell it when it's alive. Now, where exactly is it slaughtered? It's slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash as a korban. Do you know what happens to an animal that's slaughtered as a korban? It gets even more kedusha. So if you're not allowed to sell it when it's still alive, a tamim means an animal that's going to be put, some of it will be put on the altar, the blood will be sprinkled, the emurim will be put on the mizbeach. So avade, for sure, if it's shachut, of course it may not be sold. That is where it really gets imbued with the highest level of kedusha. That will be the first issue that we have to address, and without doubt, make no mistake, a Meiser Behema, since the rule is you may not sell it even when it's alive, when it's a tamim, you for sure cannot sell it when it's shachut. And a chanami. The only question is, why did the Mishnah formulate it the way it formulated it? That's going to be the first topic of today. Now, I just want to say the other halach. The other halach in the Mishnah is concerning a bechor. That habachar, listen to these words, unlike Meiser Behema, even though you would argue bechor has even more kedusha because it's born automatically holy. You don't even have to declare it holy. It's called kadosh mirechem. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says, habachar, yes, moichnin oisoi tamim chai. You can sell it. Now, the recipient aviv has to bring it as a carbon. But I can still sell it. And if it's a balmum, the Mishnah says, by the bechor, once it's blemished, it cannot be offered on the altar. There, it could be sold both if it's chai and if it's shachut. If the bechor is tamim, like we just explained, even though you are allowed to sell it, that's only if it's alive. The moment you shecht it, shechting a carbon, tamim, means it was slaughtered in the azara. When you slaughter something in the azara, it gets the highest level of kedusha. Even the bechor may not be sold if it's tamim shachut. So if it's tamim, it can only be sold chai. If it's balmum, chai and shachut. And then the Mishnah does what it did with Meiser, which really goes into the machlokes Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, but let's go to what the Mishnah says, that since the bechor is allowed to be sold, therefore also umekachin boyes isha. So you have this correlation that we're going to discuss more today. If Hashem does not allow me to sell something, which means I am not its owner, even though I have the right to eat it because I'm eating off God's table, if it's not mine, how can I affect kedushin with it? Right, the last topic we learned yesterday, that a guest in someone's house, right, that's the whole question. If I'm your guest, and by the way, this is a machlokes all the way down on the poskim. If I'm a guest in your house and I take some of the meat that I served on my plate and I give it to a woman next to me, a woman that's allowed to get married to me, that wants to marry me, and she wants to marry me even though I'm giving her kedushin with Yenam's piece of meat, that's a big chiddush to find that, but it's going to, whether it's effective or not. Is it mine or is it not mine? Either I'm a guest in your house, I'm eating off your table. I'm not a ganef. I'm eating it because you invited me, but it's not mine or isn't mine. That's the question over here. So since the halacha is that a bechor, yes, you can sell it tamim chai, that's why you can be mekadosh boyes isha. Because if you can sell it, it means it belongs. If it belongs to you, you can be mekadosh to isha. So we're going to, now, what's the source? How do we know that Meiser Behema has a higher level of kedusha? Right? Meiser Behema ein moichrin oisoi tamim chai. Bechor, yes, moichrim. Where do we get that from? So a big part of today's daf, like in Kachim, will be simply to find the sources in the Chumash. If you want, you can take out a Chumash. If you want, we have in the Torah Oir Hashalom, we have the psukim properly written out. So there's going to be a lot of limudim. But on the side, we're going to get a little bit into the halachas of theft and the mitzvah, the obligation of returning theft. We're going to get into bigger topics called Kol Shebiyodoi Lasois, Lav Kemechusar Maise Domu. Even if something still needs to happen, but if I'm able to make it happen right away, many times we say it's as if it already happened. We'll apply this to our topics. And finally, we're going to have in this Kachim Sugyam, we're going to have a very important Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan says the following. When we began the Masechta, we quoted accurately a explicit machlokes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. In the Mishnah, they are arguing about Meiser Sheni. That Rabbi Meir says, Meiser Sheni, ein mekachin boyisha, because Rabbi Meir holds Meiser Sheni is mama and gavoya. Same, it's not yours. It's not yours. You can eat it, but it's not yours. How can you be mekadosh a woman? Rabbi Yehuda holds that mama and hedyet and mekachin boyisha. That's where they argue. Now, in that same Mishnah, there's also a discussion in the Reisha of the Mishnah in which there is no machlokes written whether kohanim who get whatever they get because it's their base av, it's their mishmer, they get, like we just mentioned, the chazei and the shoik, from the karbanos, from the shlamim, or whatever else a kohen gets in the Beis Hamikdash as him being a kohen, can a kohen affect kedushin with that? So that Mishnah makes a statement, no, it cannot. Then by Meiser Sheni, there's a machlokes Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that even though we know Meiser Sheni has a lesser kedusha than the karbanos that are given to a kohen, Rabbi Yochanan holds that Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Benegei Meiser Sheni, that it's Mamin Hedyet, Rabbi Yehuda really argues with the Reisha of the Mishnah, and he holds the same by all karbanos, that once the kohen gets his share because that's the way it worked in the Beis Hamikdash. They made this agreement. I work on this week, you work on that week. I get, and he got his chelik in the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yehuda always holds that once the kohen gets any of the matnas kohuna, like Meiser Sheni, it's considered mamin hedyet, and he's able to affect kedushin. This is going to be a good kitzur, I hope, of today's daf. But again, we're learning mamish. We're going into Masechtas Kachim, daf Dalid and daf Hey, and then we're going to come back. Don't worry, to Meiser Sheni. Plenty of that. Okay, so daf Gimel Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom, says the Holy Mishnah, Meiser Behema, Ein Moichrin Oisoi Tamim Chai, and that implies that that you can't sell it when it's Tamim Chai. When it's Shachut, well, then you could sell it. When you shech the carbon, that's the Biur Hagra. We spoke out the Biur Hagra in the words of introduction. Just take a look quickly, 5 lines on the bottom. Before we turn to Amid, the last shtickle in the left side, Ha Amasnisan Parech, which is the words Hashoichet Muter. Can't be. And that is implying mashma hashchutin. If you shecht mice now, a meiser behema that's tamim is slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash as the carbon of meiser behema, as a carbon shlamim. Moichrim bitmiya can be, because once you shecht a carbon, the yoiser kedusha soy chamura, it becomes even more connected to kedusha once it's slaughtered. So if there is a restriction of me not being allowed to sell it, like we began this Masechta, God calls Meiser Sheni Kadosh, and you can't sell it. So certainly Kachim cannot be sold. And if you can't even sell it Chai, then Hashoichet Muter. So answers the Gemara, Daf Dalet, today's Daf, Tanit Vei Rabbi Yanai. No. That really, Loi Shanya, you made a good Kal V'Chomer. Loi Shanya ben Chayo ben Shachar. And not only that, that's the whole vart of the Mishnah. This is a tangent. That there is a difference in this subcategory of shlamim between Meiser Behema and Bechor. That Meiser Behema may never be sold. Never. Meaning, Ben Tamim, whether Chai or Shachat. Okay, so you would think, okay, that's because it's alive. That's because it's either going to be slaughtered as a carbon, or it was already geschachten in the Beis Hamikdash. No, says the Gemara, Bein Tamim or Bein Balmum. Even if it's a Balmum, which means it will not be offered on the Mizbeach, nevertheless, since it was designated as Meiser Behema, that level of Kedusha means it's not yours to sell. Period. You can't sell it. Or because of the reverence that we have to its Kedusha, it's disrespectful to sell it. And therefore, again, we have this expression a lot in this Masechta of Elaida Milam. Either this is a question or you have to know how to read the words. So let's go. Really, the Mishnah should have said, no, Elaida Mila Tanan. So why did it say Chai Veloy Shachut? Doesn't work. The formulation doesn't work. It gives a false impression. The implication doesn't sound correct. And here we have a typical answer. Typical answer is that Rabbeinu HaKadosh needed to write the Mishnah symmetrically. The pshat for that is that when you memorize, we don't memorize as much as. So much easier to memorize things when they're written out in a certain way. Helps for the zikaron. And don't forget, the Mishnah is making the contrast between Ma'aseh Behemet and Bechor. The words of the Mishnah by Bechor is that HaBechor moichrin oisai tamim chai. By the way, a Bechor, when it says you can sell it tamim chai, it doesn't mean that if it's a balmum, you can sell it. It means the opposite. If a Bechor is a balmum, then you can sell it both chai and shachut. If it's tamim, only chai. So since by Bechor, Rebbe needed to write these words, that Bechor, yes, moichrin oisei tamim chai. So to be symmetrical, by Meiser Behema, we say Meiser Behema is not like Bechor. How is it not like Bechor? That's the opening. Meiser Behema ein moichrin oisei tamim chai. It's not like Bechor. Let's read it inside. Begin nitnei de basra. Since the Mishnah, in its second tangent, is going to write HaBechor moichrin oisei tamim chai. The Gemara has to quote the other words for you to understand what tamim chai means. In other words, I want to make something clear that HaBechor cannot be sold, even a Bechor, once they slaughtered it in the Beis HaMikdash. If it's a tamim, it cannot be sold shachot. because like we just said, a carbon pre-shchita has a lower level of kedusha, even though it has already the designation of going on the altar. There's kedushas mizbeach, but it wasn't slaughtered yet. Then when you slaughter it, now it becomes even holier. Okay? And balmum chai v'shachut. So in order to write the same words in the opposite, by the meiser behema, we write b'chor meicher noiseh tamam chai, meiser behema ein meicher noiseh tamam chai. But the emes, that's the word, meiser behema, may never be sold. Whether it's tamim, whether it's balmum, whether it's chai, whether it's shachud. Where do we get that from? Where do we know this? L'chayda, they're both subcategories in shlamim. Pesach, who told you? So that's the Gemara right now. So Rab Abba Bar Yaakov v'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, and this is a Gzeira Shava. Nemar Kan. This is a pasuk at the end of Bechul Koisai. These psukim are speaking explicitly about Meiser Behema. The Torah says Lo Yigoel. I want you to know that there are two words that at least generally mean the same thing. Pidyon and Geula means the same thing in this context. That when you have a carbon, and for whatever reason you want to take the kedusha from it and put it on something else, either you can use the word you are redeeming it. You can't stop redeem it. Where does the kedusha go? The kedusha has to be nifda on something, or you can use the words pidyon. The Torah uses a less used word, which is Geula. In other words, by Meiser Behema, if the Torah just wanted to communicate that you can never redeem it, the Torah should have says Lo Yipadeh. The Torah uses the words Lo Yigol, and if you want, Islam, I always like reading the words. This is just in a word. Vayikra Chav Zayin Lamed Gimel. Just to see, we're making a Gzeira Shava with a pasuk that's written just a few psukim prior, and the Torah writes Lo Yivaker. This is Meiser Behema. Lo Yivaker ben Torah. In other words, the tenth is holy. You don't manipulate which tenth will be the tenth, whether it's a better animal, whether it's a worse animal. And the Torah now also introduces the din of not making temura. Not making temura is not only for Meiser Behema, but that's where the Torah speaks about it. Once you designated this tenth as holy, don't say something else should be its substitute. V'lo yimerenu. And then the detail, v'im hamer yimerenu v'hayohu utmurasa yakodesh. And then the Torah says, Lo Yigoel. Lo Yigoel goes on Meiser Behema. You can keep your finger in the Torah Rashalim. Now, in Vayikra Chav Zayin, Pasuk Chav Ches, Mamash 5 psukim prior, there's something called Cherem. Cherem is another expression of something that's being given as a gift. Either Chermei Hashem, to the Beis HaMikdash, or things are being gifted to the Kohanim. These are called Chermei Kohanim. It says by Chermei Kohanim, and I'm going to read the pasuk in the Torah Oira Shalem. Ach kol cherem. That cherem is not chermei Hashem. Chermei Kohanim. Asher yachrem ish lashem. Mikol asher loid. Lashem here goes to the Kohanim. Miyadom and bebehema. Steachu zasai. So the din is lo yimacher v'lo yigoel. Lo yimacher v'lo yigoel. They were speaking about another detail. Not sell, not redeem. I'm not going to get into chermei Kohanim right now. If not, we'll never finish the daf. But by chermei Kohanim, the Torah juxtaposed it. When the Torah says Lo Yigoel, it also says don't sell it. By Meiser Behema, the Torah could have said Lo Yipadeh. The Torah chooses to use a less commonly used word, Lo Yigoel. Why? To give us a Gzeira Shava, Meiser Behema, to what was written just prior, a few verses. That's important that it's prior. No, Hashem doesn't want to repeat himself. Hashem already wrote that Lo Yimacher by Chermei Kohanim. Since Hashem writes the words by Meiser Behema, Lo Yigoel, that's to hint that the rules of Chermei Kohanim, including Lo Yimacher, goes to Meiser Behema. Meiser Behema may never be sold. That's the source. Ma Lo Yigoel, ha'omer b'Chermei Kohanim, einoi lo nimker v'lo nigol. Af Lo Yigoel, ha'omer kan, einoi lo nimker v'lo nigol. Beautiful. And that's that. Okay. So that's the source. First of all, we clarified that Meiser Behema may never be sold. Stam. Bein chai, bein shachut. Bein tamim, bein balmum. Why? Because the Torah, through a Gzeira Shava, is saying, don't sell Meiser Behema. Period. Okay. By Bechar, which l'choira, it's another type of shlamim. Here the Mishnah says, Bechar is much more, we allow the owner to sell it a lot more. Not always, but a lot more. What's pshat? Not always. Actually, the only time that you may not sell a bechar. By the way, this goes on the coin. Of course, the owner cannot sell it. It's not his to sell. The owner has to give the bechar to the coin. We're speaking about you gave it to the coin. We're speaking about bisman there's a mizbeach. So there, if the Bechor is tamim, it's amazing. Even though it has to be offered as a carbon. Imagine the kohen has the right to sell it. The owner of the kohen, now, if this kohen, Yankel, he went ahead and he already shechted in the Beis Hamikdash, now we can't sell it. That's the only time he can sell it. If the Bechor is a Balmum, then Bechlal, it becomes property of the kohen. That's already easier to understand. At least now it's a Balmum, you could sell it ben chai ben shachot. But really, we need to have a source. That's the ikir. Huh? Yes. Now we have to have a source. How do you know that Bechor, you could sell a tamim chai? Now that we know about Meiser Behema, from the Gezeda Shava, Meiser Behema, you're not allowed to sell it. You would argue, okay, that's a raya from the Chumash that things in this category cannot be sold. So Rabbi Yaakov did Roima'a, Rabbi Yaakov from the south, asked Rabbi Yosi, Klum ksiv bebechor loy sifte bebalmum? Does the word now by the Bechor, the Torah doesn't only say the words loy sifte that it says. It doesn't only say it when it's unblemished, and slaughtered. The Torah says don't redeem it. It's even better. Use the words don't redeem it to tell you never. So the Torah says no. By Meiser Behema, indeed, as we just mentioned, our Gzeira Shava loy chilka haTorah ben chai uben shachud ben tamim uben balmum. A Meiser Behema may never be sold. So think about it. The moment we see that the Bechor is not the same, how do we know that? Because the Torah doesn't say that you're not allowed to sell it. What we compare Meiser Behema and Bechor is that whether chai, whether shachud, ben tamim, ben balmum, we compare. Actually, tamim. Shachut is a separate category. That's already completely kachim. But we allow for their laws to be consistent. So just like by Meiser Behema, we're never allowed to sell it. Torah, by Bechor, we're going to allow it to be sold. With the only exception, as we mentioned, once it's taka completely out of the hands of the kohen, which is when it's tamim and when it's shachut. Okay. Look inside the Marafulda, right? 10 lines from the top or something like that. Klum ksiv abba bechor loy sifte bebalmum betom hu dechsiv. When the Torah writes the words by a bechor aviv that was slaughtered. That's a tamim. The Torah says once it was slaughtered loy sifte. Now, so the Gemara's kasha is, well, maybe that goes even to a balmum. How do you know? Maybe loy sifte is never. The Bishleime betam yalfinim edechsiv loy sifte aval mechira alidei koyin muter. Aval bebalmum loy sifte implies that you're allowed to sell it. That's the word. The Torah doesn't say lo yigoel. What did we learn by Cherme Kohanim? Lo yigoel v'lo yimacher. By a Bechor, the Torah doesn't say the words lo yigoel. What does the Torah say? Lo sifte. That's the limud. The fact that the Torah says lo sifte, that's to teach you that yes, yimacher.
Analogous with
No, it should be analogous because they're both shlamim category. It's logic. From the fact that the Torah doesn't say lo yigol, the Torah says lo yisifada, which implies that you could sell it. Meiser Behema may not be sold. Bechor may be sold because the Torah doesn't write the words lo yigol. We make them analogous by either you could or you can't always. Even though, again, there is an exception by the Bechor, that a Bechor that was already slaughtered, tamim, that's something separate. That's the word. That's kachim logic. In other words, when Hashem wants to allow you to sell it, Hashem chooses the words loy sifte or loy sipada. If only when Hashem doesn't allow you to sell it, does he say the words loy yigo. By Bechor, it says loy sifte, which means it could be sold. Once you know it could be sold, I'm going to automatically say it can always be sold, even though there's always an exception, which is tamim shachud. Okay. Now, the Mishnah says by a Bechor that not only Bechor, Meichra Noisei Tamim Chai, not only a Bechor Balmum could be sold, Ben Chai or Ben Shachut, in all of these cases, the Mishnah then says, Umekachen Boy Ish. By what? By Bechor. By Meiser Behema, the Mishnah says Meiser Behema ein moichrin oisoi. Even though the Mishnah writes the words Tamim Chai, it doesn't mean that. That's just to be symmetrical. The Mishnah basically is saying Meiser Behema, you may never sell it. And then it says by Meiser Behema, Gemara is going back to Meiser Behema, that ein mekachin bayasa isha, b'chor yes mekachin isha, Meiser Behema mekachin isha. Okay, so it sounds like it's simple. Not so simple. There are parts of the animal that actually, we're going to call them byproducts, that they are considered to be the property of their owner, even after they were shechted in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore they are allowed to be used to be mekadosh isha. And indeed, Tani, we learned in the Braisa that even though you may not use the ma'aser behema to be mekadosh isha, but what but avol mekachin, you could be mekadosh a woman either by using its gidav, its sinews, and the ba'atzam of its bones, ubekarnov and its horns, ubetalafav or with its hooves. In other words, these byproducts, I'm going together. They may be sold, and since they may be sold, they could be used to be mekadosh a woman. Now, first of all, how do you get that from? We just had the Gzeira Shava. So Amar Ab Lazar, why are we allowed to use it for personal use? Mipnei shekasuv by bracha. And the initial understanding is, first of all, look inside the Torah Eira Shalom Gimel, and that's Lamara Fulda, because there's a machlekes what pasuk are we referring to? And according to the Mara Fulda, we are referring to a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. And I'm reading the pasuk. V'chaltem sham lifnei Hashem alekechem usmachtem. That's in Yerushalmi. B'choil mishlach yadchem atem uvotechem asher birachacha Hashem alekecha. That pasuk is speaking about Meiser Sheni. So the Havamina will mean that we know what a bracha means. Let's go al pi Chasidus. What does a bracha mean? To draw something all the way down. Drawing something down will mean that it's even begashmias, I'm benched. Even for personal use, I'm benched. To call Meiser Behema a bracha, there has to be some even personal use that I can have. If I can't use it ever for anything personal, not any part of it, then what's the bracha? It's a bracha to God. It's not all the way, drawing it all the way down. That's the havamin of what Rabbi Lazar meant. That if it says a bracha, part of a bracha means that you can use it even for personal. Now, so if you're going to understand bracha means you can use it from personal, so then why not the Kaddish b'fsarei? So the Gemara says that you can't say. Amar Rabbi Yosi, no, we just had a Gzeira Shava. Klum lamdu meiser. Didn't we just say that we learn meiser from Chermei Kohanim? And that what ma Chermei Kohanim ein bakachum ma'isha. So af meiser behema ein bakachum ma'isha. So the Gemara says, well, make up your mind. If the Gzeira Shava trumps the word bracha, so let it trump it all the way. Even though you can argue, you can differentiate, but the Gemara doesn't go back to that. So answers the Gemara, and this is the understanding, the new understanding of what Rabbi Lazar says, that have Surka lahi the Amar Rabbi Lazar mipnei shekasav and bracha. Now you understand what Rabbi Lazar says. What's pshat? Now you understand. There's different ways. So we're going to load the Pnei Moshes. Is three mamash in the beginning of the third line before the end, before the bottom. Huh? I can't hear you. Chermei. Yeah, that's a certain type of gift to the Kahana. Don't think that the meaning of Rabbi Lazar is, since it says bracha must mean that you can even get to use it personally. That's not what he meant. From the word bracha we know, the word bracha, you know what bracha means? What part of the animal is the gebenched part of the animal? That's what he's saying, not drawing all the way down. The meat is the blessed part of the animal. A whole different understanding. The four byproducts, the gidav, the atzamav, the karnov, and the telafov are not the blessed part of the animal. They're secondary parts of the animal. Where do we make the Gzeira Shava for that which it says bracha? What has such a level of kedusha that only the basar? Masha'enkein, these byproducts are not so blessed. It's not the blessed part of the animal, and therefore we have the right to say that the Gzeira Shava doesn't apply to it. That's a new understanding. Okay, says the Gemara. Now, 1 second. We're going with, guys, bottom line is, no one is debating the Braisa. We're just trying to understand how did they get there. But the Braisa says that a man could be Mekadosh a woman, let's say with the sinews of Meiser Behema. Now, of course, that would mean that after the animal was slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash, and the owner, Shlamim, gets the remains of the animal, and now he has the horns, that he can be Mekadosh Isha, it's very simple to understand. The Gemara has a Gavaldik Akash. What happens if the owner has Tamim Chai? Tamim Chai cannot be slaughtered, cannot be sold. Ein moichlin. Okay. What happens if a man gives this animal to a woman? Now understand, he's not giving her the animal because he cannot. It's his animal, it's his carbon. He's giving her the animal for her to take it. And what he's saying is that after it's going to undergo the shchita and the avoida and the ta-ta-ta, then we're going to have the karnov. So I want you to become mikudeshes right now with the horns. Could you give it to a woman right now, even though right now when the animal is living, these byproducts are not separated from the animal? So there's two things. For sure, at some point, the Kedushin will be chal. If I give a woman right now my Meiser Behema, I'm not giving her the meat. I'm telling her, Hareat Nikodeshet with the Gidov of this animal. Either, that's the words that I said in the introduction, Kol Shebiyodoi Lasois Lav Kemechuser Meiser Dami. Since if I want, I can shecht it right now in the Beis HaMikdash, it's a tamim. So it's as if it's already slaughtered. So we say that the Kedushin goes into effect right now, option one. Or we say, if a man gave it to a woman and tells this is Meiser Behema, Ema Kachan Bayisha, can't do it. But I'm giving you the parts that I will own later. Maybe it only goes into effect when? After the Shchita. After the Shchita, then we can already say that we separate the horns. And now the question will be, what happens if in between, let's say I gave it to this woman, before they shechted the animal, Reuven gave that woman Kedushin, who is she engaged to? If it goes into effect right now, if we say the rule, Kol Shebiyodoi Lasois Lav Kemechuser Maisa, even though when the animal is still alive, you can't separate the horns from the animal, but it's as if it's separated. So my Kedushin went into effect. She's already a married woman. There's no room for the other Kedushin to take place, to take hold. If my Kedushin will only go into effect after the Shchita, if another man gave this woman Kedushin before the Shchita, then she'll be engaged to the other man. That's the Gemara's question. That's Rabbi Yehuda.
Rabbi, what about if the korban becomes, if the animal becomes not tamim, so you cannot check it anymore, so there's no shchita?
That's not true. If the animal is a balmum, I cannot sell it, but for sure I can shecht it. And there again, when it's geschachten, I can never sell the meat. I can never be mekadosh a woman with the meat, but I can always be mekadosh the woman with the gida of atzama of karnov and tolav. So Rabbi Yehuda Boyi, Omar leisha, mishchili ma'aser behema zeh, take it for you, daf dalad amid beis. And he's saying, I know the din that ein mekachin boy isha. Shetiskachi li boy la'achar shchita. So what's the law? Do we say, ma'achar sheyesh biyodoi lishchoit? It's called kol shebiyodoi lasois, lafke mechuser maisem. And therefore, mikudeshes mikvar, that means she gets the kedushin the moment she takes the animal, even though the animal was not slaughtered. Or do we say that the kedushin will be chal later? If she takes it now, when will the kedushin be chal? Only la'achar shchita, and l'may nafkamina, like we said. And what will happen if another man gave her a normal kedushin before the shchita? And now we have to know to whom is she engaged. That's the Gemara's question. And Kaminig of Yerushalmi, we don't even attempt to answer it. We just want to bring up that question. Beautiful. Who's a great question? Who spoke that out? This is the Mara Fulda. Okay. Next. So Danny's asking Breda. For some reason, the Marab Fulda doesn't want to go to Breda. He's saying much more than Breda. Not that after you shecht it retroactive, but don't forget, the horns are there b'metzias. Elamam, when the animal is alive, generally we don't view the horns as something separated of. Which is why the given is that when the animal is still alive, you cannot even sell the horns. You can only sell it after it's slaughtered. After it's slaughtered, then you can view the horns as something separated. I get that. In other words, whoever knows a little bit of Chassidus, we're speaking about that in the world of Atzilus, even the Kalim of Atzilus are one with the Oir. So do you have, when the animal is alive, are the Karnayim something separate? Or since the animal has Oir in it, there's life in it, there's no Karnayim, there's a Behema. And we're not saying Breira. We're saying that since Kol Shebiyodi, since you can shecht it right now, so even though it's alive, we view every part of the animal already to be separated. Kol Shebiyodi lasois lafkim. Fact that I can take the life out of the animal, because since I can take the life out, don't tell me that all of the animal is one living animal. It's not true. Lav dafka, it's living. I can make it not living. I can shecht it. So even when it's living, I view every animal part as a separate part. And if that's the case, so when the woman took the animal, she took the kavana to take the karnayim. If a man, I'll tell him better, if a man gives a woman a ring, it's not what we do. And on the ring, there's a precious stone, a stone that's worth a pruta. Gives her, and he tells her, Befedesh, I'm not giving you the ring for the ring I'm keeping. I'm being mekadesh you with the stone. Absolutely, she is mikodeshes. The fact that he gave her the stone connected to the ring doesn't undo the fact that he gave her the stone. Even though the stone is fixed into the ring, so what? We view it as two separate things. I think since the animal is alive, there's a svara to say that the life of the animal makes a yichud in all of the body parts. You can't separate the body parts. And if it's all meyuchid, then that's mamish devart. It's not bereda. It's kol shebiyodei lasis means that only in Atzilus we say iyu v'garmo yichad. In the world of Bria, we don't say iyu v'garmo yichad, even though you have godly light in the world of Bria. We view every sphera to be separated. Echad and not yachid. Okay? Very good this. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, weiter. Says the Gemara, now we're continuing with Ma'aser Behema, Rab Ze'er b'shem Rabbi Ba. Bar Mamo. Let's go to something else. Now, one thing is clear. Even though I'm not allowed to sell it, even though I'm not allowed to be mekadosh a woman, make no mistake, it's my animal to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash. So that when someone steals it from me, and they have an obligation to do tshuva, which part of that, or the beginning of it, or part of it will mean to give back, to undo what they did when they could. So vadai im hoyakayam machziroi loy be'enoi. And don't forget, who has the right to eat the meat? Let me go with that, Aviv. It's my shlamim. Even if we're going to call it mama in gavoya, doesn't matter. But who was zachu to eat it mishulchan gavoya? I'm the owner. No doubt. Because even if it doesn't have the value of a pruta, if it's be'en, you have to give it back to me. The question will be that what happens if the Ganav took the Ma'aser Behema? I mean, this is the worst. We're not going into what he violated. And the Ganav ate it up. Does he have to return that which he ate up, the value of what he ate up? You know what I can argue? If he would steal a Bechar, since the owner is able to be Mekadosh a woman with the Bechar, which means whose money is it? The owner's. Then he has to give back the owner the value. But since Ma'aser Behema ain't Moichre Noisai, ve'ein Mekachon by Isha, you can argue it doesn't have the worth of a Pruta. It has no worth. Can't do anything with it. Now, if it's Be'en, he has to give it back, interestingly, because the God gave him the right to eat it. So give him back his right to eat it. Mishulchan Gavoya. Give him his ticket to eat on God's table. But Masha Achal, it's not even a question. He's making a statement. But if the Ganav ate it, you know what? Achal, he ate it, which means the Ganav does not have to give back the money because it does not belong to the owner. That's based on our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar, B'Shem Rav Mana, I'll prove it to you. Now, there is a coin called a Malta. Interesting. I don't know how much, if you ever heard it. I know there's a country called Malta, I think. You know what Malta is? Malta is a coin that's less than a pruta. Just like we find B'chlal by Geneva. Ein oimrim loy she'iten Malta. That's the rule. If a person steals less than a pruta, they won't be forced by a human court to give it back. Or any other thing less than a pruta. Ein oimrim loy she'iten. The fact that the Mishnah says Ma'aser Behema ein mekachon by Isha ein moichre noisei, which means it's mama in Gavoya. If it's mama in Gavoya, then you can't force the Ganav to give it back. That is what the Gemara says. That is what Rabbi Lazar B'Shem Rav Mana says. But let's go into that. Hold on. Amar Rab Chinana. 1 second. Let's speak about this rule of someone stealing the malta. Hadod de teimar. When do we say that if someone steals a malta, if someone steals something that's pachas mishava pruta, they don't have to return it? That's only if at the moment of the theft it was not worth the pruta. So there was never a chiyuv to return it, and indeed they don't have to return it. What happens if someone steals something and at the moment of geneva it had the value of a pruta, and by the time they do tshuva, that item lost its value? They stole a little bit of gasoline. And the moment the churmuz opens up, the whole thing will be worth less. Right now it's a pruta. Tomorrow it's going to be less than a pruta. So hadod the teimar kishe'ena yafa shava pruta make kare. That's only if it was never worth a pruta. Avalam yafa shava pruta make kare. But if someone does an act of theft, God forbid, and at the moment it's worth a pruta, even if the Gemara doesn't speak it out, even if when the person wants to do tshuva, then that item itself lost its value. Nevertheless, once you're obligated to return it, that chiyuv remains enforced. The Mishnah gave off on a tangent meiser behema. The Gemara can give a tangent off on the dinim of returning the theft. Let's go weiter.
Doesn't have to give a carbon back to the bear. I mean, he's still meiser behema.
No, that's the whole part. He doesn't have to give it back. So what? In other words, if I have my meiser, it's not mine. So if someone stole it from me, okay, if the animal is there, if the animal is not there, why should they have to give it back? No. Let's say that guy brought it as a carbon, whether it's valid or not. That's not the point. Okay, now habachar. Even though again, that's the whole word. It says lo yipada, not lo yigoil. That was the word. Lo yigoil means you can't sell it. Lo yipada means you could sell it. So indeed, the Mishnah says that habachar. Again, moichren oisay tamim chai ubalmum chai v'shachut umekachin by isha. That's the whole v'chulei of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to have two dinim of Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi. The first one is b'shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi. If you remember him from Ksubas, right, of whichever daf Ayin Zayin, some of the Rabbi Shua ben Levi, the one that went into Gan Eden. Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi b'shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Indeed, when the Mishnah says that habachor, you could sell it, tamim chai, make the diuk. Only when it's chai. But once you slaughtered it, that was the first biur hagro we learned today. What happens when you shecht a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash? It gets imbued with even greater kedusha. We're speaking about bisman misbeach, bisman Beis Hamikdash. Then, once you slaughter it, it goes together, guys. Once you slaughter a bachar, ein moichre noisoi, the koyin, and ve'ein mekachin ba'isha, it goes together. That's what we're learning today. Okay. Amon taninon. Let's go to Mesechtes Kedushin. Mesechtes Kedushin is the Mishnah, like I mentioned, that discusses someone being Mekadosh a woman with Meiser Sheni. And even though the Mishnah, when it comes to Meiser Sheni, writes the Machloikis Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda, that's what they write. Rabbi Meir says, Ein Mekachin Ba'isha, Mamin Gevoya. Rabbi Yehuda says, Meiser Sheni Mekachin Ba'isha, Mamin Hedyet. The Reisha of that Mishnah is speaking about Kohanim using whatever it is that they got as their chelik in the Beis Hamikdash. The Reish of the Mishnah writes that they cannot be mekadosh a woman. Then the Mishnah goes on to Meiser Sheni. Says Rabbi Yechanan that even though Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't write it clearly, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion regarding Meiser Sheni is his opinion regarding all kachim. Tamon taninon hamakadosh bechalkoi. That's how the Mishnah begins. If a kohen gets his chelik, it's his beisav, which is his mishmar, and he was mekadosh a woman with it. The Mishnah says whether he got kachi kachim, kohanim get kachi kachim. Even if he got kachim kalam, maybe kachim kalam is his. No, the Reisha says eino mikodeshes. Why? Because the kohen is mishulchan gavoya ka'achli. And like I mentioned by heart, and Rabbi Yechanan says that all of that is only Shitas Rabbi Meir. That's a given, you have to know that. But Rabbi Yehuda, who argues with Rav Meir by Meiser Sheni, Be'emes, is also arguing with the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Amakadesh Bechelkoi, yes, Mikudeshes, and by the way, even Kachay Kachim. Omar Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi, that Rabbi Yehuda, now that you know this information that everyone needed to know, how does Rabbi Yehuda know it? Yolif kol hakochim. Where did he get it from? Now that we learned Masechtas Ma'aser Sheni, now you know the source. Like, how can you compare Ma'aser Sheni and Bechor? You know what our Mishnah does? Our Mishnah does just that. Our Mishnah is speaking about Masechtas Ma'aser Sheni, and the Mishnah gets all of a sudden Ma'aser Behema and Bechor. There is a comparison. Oh. And by Bechor, we just learned psukim that you could be mekadosh a woman. That Rabbi Yehuda yalef kol hakochim Bechor. That ma Bechor, as we learned in our Mishnah, mekachem ba'isha, af kol hakochim mekachem bohem ha'isha. Turning to Daf Hey, we have another minute. Rav Meir, now you get the whole thing. Rav Meir learns it from Ma'aser Behema. Again from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Ma'aser Behema ein mekachem ba'isa. Ma Ma'aser Behema ein mekachem ba'isha. Af kol hakochim ein mekachem ba'isha. In other words, when you learn our Mishnah, the Mishnah differentiates Ma'aser Behema and Bechor. Very simple. How do you learn Pshat in the Mishnah? Is Ma'aser Behema the rule and Bechor the exception? Is Bechor the rule and Ma'aser Behema the exception? That's the, like, what is the face, what represents Kochim? So Rabbi Yehuda learns Bechor represents. Rabbi Yehuda learns Bechor represents all